Okay, so let's dive right in. At the very heart of Kabbalah, this ancient mystical tradition, there's a huge, glaring contradiction. It's a deep philosophical paradox that really forces you to question everything we think we know about God and our ability to understand the divine.
Now, to help us navigate this really tricky subject, we're going to lean on the work of some brilliant scholars, specifically Dr. D. Weiss and Dr. J. Taylor. Their philosophical analysis is pretty much the backbone for everything we're going to talk about in this explainer.
And it all really boils down to this one massive question, right? A question that theologians have wrestled with for centuries. Can our little, finite human brains actually wrap themselves around an infinite God? Now, you might expect a simple yes or no, but Kabbalah's answer, well, it's way more interesting and honestly pretty wild.
You know, Dr. Weiss puts it so perfectly here. He basically says the Kabbalists were trying to talk out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. They were holding on to two ideas that just flat out contradict each other. And that's exactly what we're going to dig into, that incredible internal conflict.
So first things first, before we jump into the deep end with this paradox, we've got to figure out how we should even approach a subject as complex as Kabbalah. I mean, do we look at it as a historical phenomenon or as a living system of ideas?
Well, you've got two main paths you can take. The first is the historical route. You look at the people, the places, their struggles, the whole socio-historical context. It's kind of like studying the biography of an idea. But then there's the philosophical approach, which is the one Dr. Weiss really prefers. That's where you pull the ideas out, put them under a microscope, and see what they're really made of, and if they still mean something to us today.
And for what we're doing here, we're definitely going down that philosophical path with Dr. Weiss. Look, the history is absolutely fascinating for sure, but he argues that the real dynamite, the stuff that still has the power to blow your mind today, is locked inside the ideas themselves. So that's where we're going to focus.
Okay, so let's get into the first piece of this puzzle. We'll call it the thesis. This is all about the traditional foundational idea within Judaism, that God is totally transcendent and ultimately unknowable. They often use a specific term for this, the Godhead. And what that means is a God who is so utterly other, so completely beyond our reality, that any word we use, even huge words like omniscient or all-powerful, they're just inadequate. They don't even begin to scratch the surface of what God is. And this isn't just some abstract idea. It's baked right into the tradition. I mean, think about it, the commandment against making graven images, the prohibition against even speaking the divine name out loud. What's the message there? It's that you can't capture God in a picture. You can't pin God down with a word. Any attempt to do so is just wrong. The result is this massive, utter gulf, as it's described, separating us from a God we just can't possibly comprehend.
All right, so we've got our thesis. God is unknowable, period. Now, get ready for the complete opposite, the antithesis. This is where Kabbalah comes in and makes a claim that is so radical, it's almost heretical. They claim to know the very anatomy of God.
The word they use is gnosis, and we really need to pause on that because it's a huge deal. This isn't about faith in God. This is about direct knowledge of God. We're talking about an actual understanding of the divine blueprint, the inner machinery of the universe itself.
And here's the kicker. They didn't just talk about it. They drew a map. They created a visual diagram, the tree of life, that they claimed was quite literally a picture of the divine. This right here is the absolute game changer. This diagram, the tree of life, with its 10 spheres called the Sephirot, it's not a metaphor. It's presented as an actual anatomy of God, a blueprint for divinity. I mean, just think about how staggering that claim is, that we, as human beings, can actually know and map out the very structure of God. Okay, so now you can see the problem, right? We have these two incredibly powerful, totally conflicting ideas trying to exist together in the same system. This is what Dr. Weiss calls the schizophrenic nature of Kabbalah. This is the heart of the paradox.
Let's just lay it out. In one corner, you have the traditional belief. God is completely unknowable, don't even try to make a picture. And in the other corner, you have the Kabbalists holding up a detailed map and saying, here it is, folks, the blueprint to the divine mysteries. You just can't have both. Or can you?
And that's why Dr. Weiss uses that really strong word, schizophrenic. He's not being glib. He's pointing out that the Kabbalists were in a tough spot. They were trying to be good Jews, sticking to the tradition that says God is unknowable. But at the same time, they had this radical new insight, this claim to actual divine knowledge. They were trying to have their cake and eat it too. So the question becomes, how on earth do you make those two things work together?
I mean, claiming you have a map of God's anatomy isn't just a quirky philosophical problem. It's pushing right up against the line of heresy. It's a direct challenge to the most fundamental commandments about how humans are supposed to relate to the divine.
All right, so what do you do with a contradiction this massive? Well, if you're a philosopher like Dr. Weiss, you don't just throw your hands up. You have to try and resolve it. You have to find a way forward that actually makes logical sense.
And the way you do that is through pure philosophical analysis. It's pretty straightforward, really. First, you lay out the contradiction. Then, you look at both sides, not as matters of faith, but as logical arguments. And you ask, which one of these is actually a coherent, understandable system? Which one can you really get your hands on, intellectually? And when Dr. Weiss does this, he comes to a fascinating conclusion. He argues that the Kabbalistic system, the Tree of Life, the Sephirot, is actually presented as a real, understandable theory. It's a system that you can study, you can analyze, and you can even debate.
So this is where it gets really powerful. He says, look, if you have a contradiction, something's got to give. And when you look at it purely from a logical perspective, the vague idea that you can't understand God is actually the weaker argument. It's just an assertion. The stronger claim is the one that says, actually, here's a detailed system for understanding God. It's structured. It's systematic. It has to be the one that wins out.
So the final synthesis is this: that drive for gnosis, that impulse to know God, isn't just some weird add-on to Kabbalah. According to this analysis, it's the whole point. It's the most logical, most powerful part of the entire system. And in the end, this compelling, structured claim to knowledge simply has to override the old traditional assertion that God can't be known. And that leaves us with a pretty mind-bending final thought. If this analysis from Dr. Weiss is correct, if the divine is truly knowable, if we can actually map its structure, what does that even mean for us? What are the ultimate implications of having that kind of knowledge, of possessing the blueprint to the divine, a secret once thought to belong to God alone?